start and the music actually plays. Welcome to the Underground QA podcast, everyone. A podcast about quality assurance in the video game industry. My name is Ariel Smith. I'm a test discipline manager with Bungie, and I'll be your host for today, and my pronouns are she, her. We have three fellow game dev professionals joining us today, and I'll let them introduce themselves.
Hello, my name is Jakub. I'm lead QA product manager at QLOC. I've been in this industry, my pronouns are he, him. I've been in the industry for over 12 years now, mainly outsource QA, QLOC, Keyword Studios, and also crunching koalas.
Hello, my name is Tommy. I've been in the industry, my pronouns are he, him. I've been in the industry about a little over 20 years now, mostly outsourced, but I'm also in a unique situation where I'm outsourced who also outsources.
Awesome. And my name is David Benefield. My pronouns are he, him. I've been in the industry a little over 10 years. Currently a QA lead as an internal QA, but I've also been a producer working with external and internal QA, and I've been publishing QA from a functional and localization perspective. So I've kind of run the gambit of interactions with external.
Sweet. So quick disclaimer, all individuals appearing on the podcast are not doing so as official representatives of their respective companies, employers, clients, customers, or any other third party, and opinions expressed here are their own. Nothing in the podcast is intended to be tax, legal, financial, or employment advice. This production is presented for information and entertainment purposes only. For professional advice, seek out a professional. Today, we are talking about the utilization of outsourced testers and testing companies in the game industry. We're primarily going to focus on how internal and external teams collaborate with each other and how that collaboration can be improved. The discussion we have today should be informative to anyone who regularly works with or plans to utilize outsourced testers on their team. Also, we are planning to do another episode about outsourcing in the future, and I'll talk a little bit more about what that episode will look like towards the end. For now, let's jump into discussion. The first place I want to start with is we already did this a little bit in the intros, but I want to cover it again. I want everyone to talk a little bit about what their specific experience with outsourcing or XDev companies has been like so far. And, as much as possible, we will try to avoid name dropping specific companies that we have worked with. But just tell us, in what capacity have you already worked for or worked with XDev companies, and we'll go from there. So, David, why don't you start?
Okay.
What, me?
Sorry,
sure.
me?
Yeah, David.
David, okay. So my experience, I think my first job didn't have too much of this. I had external volunteer QA. That was just weird. But most of my professional experience has been internal dev QA, getting to work with external teams, mostly with external functional QA teams or FQA, but also localization QA and a little bit of certification, compatibility QA. So mostly from the internal side. However, I did do a year's stint at a company working on a Korean MMO RPG, and I was responsible for how that RPG showed up in the American market. So I was told I was dev QA, but in practice, it was more that I was publishing QA. Something came across the seas. I need to make sure that it showed up in the correct language and was functional. There was content that was specific to our version. So we had a little gambit of a little functional QA, localization QA. And it really instilled I feel after that experience, then coming back to doing more traditional dev QA, I was like, okay, I never want anybody else to experience that again. So it's very much motivated me to find, what are the barriers? How do I destroy them? Because I really, really did not like that feeling of being completely outside the loop and having no control over the situation and inability to even communicate with folks. So I've been a very strong proponent of how do I remove those barriers between internal and external from the internal side, now that I've experienced the external side.
Yeah. Jakub, what about you?
So I've been doing pretty much everything when it comes to outsource, functional testing, linguistic testing, certification testing, and compatibility testing myself. Then I was a lead. I also trained people, and now I'm a lead product manager. So I've worked on probably 200 games. I'm not credited in all of them because I wasn't that much involved. And I feel like back in the past, outsourced QA was like, give us the game, test the game, and fire and forget. That's all, goodbye. But now it's totally something different, and I really enjoy it. And I worked on games that were released. I'm working on games that aren't released yet. Some of them are not announced yet. So it's pretty much everything that you can say.
Yeah. And,
I started out as a contractor, where most of us did, probably, for a very large publisher that it was, at least back then, known for not handling contracting well. And I actually got burnt out after like 3 years of having 3 jobs. But then luckily I got another contract with another developer and learned, hey, maybe it's just the one spot. So I've been in the industry since 2002. The first half was mostly with developers as contractors. The latter half has been as a vendor with mostly publishers. And like for right now, I help oversee major publishing companies, QA, their 2P, 3P part stuff. But also in the past, I've worked for studios for Tencent and Microsoft.
Cool. My own experience is pretty limited as someone from the outsourcing side. One of my early jobs was as a contract tester, and that was at a publisher. And there are definitely similarities between that experience and what I've heard from folks who do outsourcing, because I ran into the same thing that David ran into in terms of like the companies that the developers we were working with were very frequently like very nervous that we were going to leak things, so they were very hesitant to share information with us, and sometimes they wouldn't even give us like cheat codes to play the game with. They would be like, just play the game naturally, or they might just not even tell us what changed, build the build, and just say like, well, you go in there and figure it out. You tell us what changed. But they didn't give us design docs, didn't give us change logs, didn't give us cheat codes. Sometimes it was just like as little information as possible, go forth and do some testing, and that was very challenging. But most of my experience has been as a client. I've been working with outsource companies in some capacity for the last 8 years. I've worked with, I would say, about 6 different companies. And some of them were almost entirely like represented the majority of our QA team. Other times they were kind of supplemental, and we would use them for specific things like compliance or compatibility and performance. But I've kind of like run the full gambit of being the primary point of contact for them, being a test lead who has to organize test plans and send them to outsourcing groups, or even being the person who is kind of shopping around and looking for an outsourcing company that my company wants to utilize, and trying to evaluate and pick between different companies. But the vast majority of my experience with this topic is specifically as a client. Cool. So the first thing I want to jump into in terms of talking about this is talk a little bit about like what exactly do we mean by outsource testing, like, and what does modern outsource testing look like? Because I think a lot of people have some preconceptions about outsourcing and what it means, that it is essentially like you are specifically going overseas to some like very kind of inexpensive group to cut down costs. But there's a wider variety of what outsourcing can look like and does look like in the game. So what are your thoughts, and anyone can jump in here, in terms of what does modern outsourcing look like?
So I'll jump in. I think you brought up a good point that it is definitely evolving. For example, my first project, I was writing bugs on paper and recording bugs on VHS. We didn't have access to anything. But nowadays, I've had the pleasure of working like alongside embedded with the developers. We have a wide range of kind of things, which is, I think, the biggest advantage, which would be scalability, right? We're able to invest in specific areas that every studio can't invest in, say, compatibility or LOC. And it doesn't make sense to spool up all those assets for a small time. So by us covering a lot of little ones, it makes sense for us. And so that's a way that we can help kind of burden the cost and, which is the other value, lower the cost for our clients.
Okay, so I can be the next person here. So basically, as I mentioned earlier, back in the past, it was like we have a task for you, do it, and we're done. Nowadays, it's like when you're making a game, it's a big puzzle, right? And it's not 2D anymore; it's 3D, 4D, whatever. However complicated your game is, but there are some pieces that you are missing, and you're looking for someone to either fill in for compatibility, localization, for cert. Or maybe you're looking for subject matter experts. Maybe you have problems finding people in your region who are good at a specific genre, or maybe you're looking for someone who's into. So David mentioned that it was a Korean MMO. It was supposed to target a specific area, right? So people who are developing the game may not know this area that they are supposed to launch the game soon. So this is something that can also help them by providing feedback.
I love both your responses. The only thing I'll add, just to call it out specifically, is console testing. That's been another one for us, is that when you're trying to get onto a console for the first time, you're not as familiar with it, reaching out to an external group who's tested on that before, whether it's putting the game on the console at first or if you're trying to port it over later, is that usually the external QA has a swath of history and background that they've done this before for someone else. So you can rely on them to kind of kickstart your own internal QA and like, how do we handle this? So again, just compatibility, but also from consoles has been really big for us.
Yeah, I think that there's like one of the key differences between like internal QA and external QA is that internal QA tends to be very specialized on the specific game or project that they are making, and external QA tends to have other kinds of specialties that are not specific to a single game, like console certification, performance. There's also like another like use case for outsourcing, which is the more general functional testing use case, where they don't have a specific specialty that the internal team lacks, because we're just talking about general functional QA, and that tends to be something that most QA testers are capable of doing. So I'm curious to hear from y'all, like, what do you think are the primary reasons that companies are looking to utilize external QA in that capacity, where it does not involve a specific expertise that their internal functional QA team lacks?
So that's what I'm mostly familiar with. And I mean, let's be blunt, cost, right? We're all being asked to do more with less every year. And there are different ways to approach that. And outsourcing is one of those. Yes, we do have people who kind of jump around in our, firefighters or very, SMEs, but the majority of our people have been on the same project for at least a year. We have people up to like 7 years on the same game. So they're really just kind of part of the team. But in my experience, it tends to be kind of like, there just seems to be like a certain level of role that under that, it just makes sense to outsource for scalability reasons, for all sorts of other reasons. Like, for example, we do all of our training, our hiring, all of that, it isn't necessarily available to, for example, a publisher as opposed to a developer. So, yeah, I think that's kind of where we're starting to fill those roles.
Say a lot of my experience is around single player games. And in the single player game cycle is that you do your prototyping, your vertical slice, then eventually move to production, then alpha and beta. You definitely want a lot more QA in production alpha beta than you do during prototype and vertical slice. So being able to rely on an external group allows you to scale up at those times and then go back down. Obviously, there's other ways you can manage that with alternating projects and whatnot, but that's a very common use case I see, is that, A, we don't need QA, or at least as many QA, during the earlier phases as we feel that we need during the later phases. And so commonly, folks are relying on external QA to help manage that overhead.
I would say that there's also something that some people are missing, that when you reach out to external QA, we've worked with you guys probably, we've also worked with tons of other companies, so we have the know-how of other companies' work. We don't want to break NDA, of course, but maybe there's something you can learn from us. Maybe there's something we can talk about and like share some ideas that will be useful for you. Because when you're focused on a single project, you may be missing some points. It's like one tester sitting doing playthroughs of a game for a month, and then there's this bug that they will miss because they are used to just playing through the game, doing speedruns and so on. So just listen to external QA. Maybe there's something that they will be that they can help you looking into more, like some tools or how you approach testing.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. I think consoles are a great example of that.
Tommy, yeah.
Sorry. Consoles, as David brought up, are a good example of that. When we first started, we were really only catering to one client, and it was very heavily console. So 10 years ago, when the PC kind of market shifted, we had to get up to speed quickly and learn a lot of stuff that we weren't used to. Now, one of our other clients is mostly PC, and they're starting to console, and it's like, oh, thank God we've been doing this for the last 20 years, or 10 years. That we're able to share this, not break an NDA, just the lessons learned and kind of the keys, making lives easier.
Yeah, go ahead, Jacob.
Yeah, so there's also one thing I want to add in terms of the experience. So I won't tell the name, but there's a game that we worked on, and we were, at some point we thought like, hey, maybe we can make this game better by providing the developers feedback. So we sat down, made like 2 A4 pages of feedback, and there was like no reply from them. A couple of years later, they made the second game, which included those changes, but they didn't tell us anything about it.
That's funny. There was something about what you're talking about there with like the sort of access to the kind of pulse of the industry, essentially, right? Like because XDev companies are working with a bunch of different companies, they have a better sense of what like normal is and like what kind of the standard practices are throughout the industry than an individual developer that is like only working with their specific company, and maybe like they only have one project, right? So they only have one like kind of way or one sort of context to look at testing in, whereas you have all of these different contexts. The thing that I have found as a client though is that I often run into the case where my XDev company or my XDev testers are very like, how to put this? They're very like almost subservient. It feels like the wrong word, but they're so willing to do whatever I, as the client, say will make me happy that it sometimes feels like they're holding back from telling me what they really think. And I wish I could benefit more from what you're talking about, Jacob, where companies are like, hey, so here's what you're doing that is like not at all consistent with the rest of the industry. We've tried it this way and we have found it to be a lot better. Like you're using this like super outdated like test case management tool. Like get with the program, use TestRail. It's way better. Here's like the 10 things you can do with TestRail that you're not currently doing. Like I feel like I very rarely get feedback from XDev folks like that is kind of like that like strategy consultation almost, as opposed to like functional execution. But I also wondered like to what extent has that been like either my fault or the companies I've worked with the fault of us, because we're telling them, hey, we're hiring you to do functional testing instead of saying, hey, can you give us some advice on what you think we're doing wrong in terms of our test approach? I don't know. I'm curious to hear from both of you, Jacob and Tommy, on like your experience with that.
Kind of, you hit on two things there. The first one being like the time spent. As David mentioned, oftentimes developers are on the same project for a long time. And so one of the advantages to external QA is, we're on there for maybe a year, sometimes 2 or 3 for like sustainment models, whatever. But the majority of people, right, are shifting around. And so we're seeing the things that are evolving much faster. And I can't tell you how many times, even at my level as a senior QA manager, I've had to explain things to very prominent people in the industry just because they, the higher up you are, usually you're on game for 4 or 5 years. Like if you haven't shipped the game in 4 or 5 years, think about all the stuff that's changed in that time. So we're able to bring that too. And luckily, the clients that we work with, we've been working with for a long time. And we've been able to kind of nurture that relationship where we can, we call it, quality upstream, making sure that we're not just yes-mamming everybody. And that and that comes both ways. I don't think it's easy to say who's responsible. Yes, we are taking cues from your client, and that's kind of the most important thing. We'll try to kind of push the barrier. But one thing I think that a lot of people don't think about is there's the different levels. So like top level might say, yes, be super honest. And the middle level might be doing things that you don't, like the people we work with day to day might be doing things to kind of maybe change that narrative in terms of whether or not we're comfortable following through with it.
So from my perspective,
but that's on us to give that feedback too.
Go ahead, Jacob.
So I don't know, Ariel, how you communicate to your to the other companies, but from my perspective, whenever someone reaches out to us and I'm the first point of contact, we try to kind of understand what's the approach of the company. Of course, as the more we work with them, the more we understand each other. But at first, it's like, okay, they're giving us money, so we have to do what they say. And we've had a case. Where like last year we started cooperating with a company. Currently they have like many games, and at first it was like, okay, let's try to learn how they work. They were learning how we work, and now it's like, okay, we have this dev who has like no experience of QA. Tell them how you work. I'm sure they will love you, and that's what we're doing. In some cases, companies come to us, tell us like, okay, here are the rules that we want you to follow, and that's that. So it really depends. It depends actually on both sides. But I would say, as an outsource QA, we have to be more cautious because, I mean, at some point you can tell us like, hey, that's done. We don't want to work with you anymore. But I love the kind of relationship where we can be open to each other and we can tell like, hey, there's something wrong happening, and if there's something that you feel like we are doing wrong, just let us know.
Yeah. There was something we were talking about earlier that I wanted to circle back to, which is the idea of like scalability and how that is an advantage of using an outsourced company because, hey, if you need 10 testers for a short period of time, you can hire those like 10 testers via this XDev company, and you don't have to like worry about going through all the effort of like doing the hiring process yourself for 10 people that you're only going to use for a pretty short time. So curious to get y'all's thoughts on how does that scaling actually work in practice? Like, can I just snap my fingers and get 10 testers tomorrow, or does it maybe take a little while because the company I'm working with has to do things on their end to make that happen?
That is a great question. And I think one that more people probably should be asking of their partners. But again, it's going back to, as an outsourced person, like, you're my client. So it's also on me to make sure that you understand the expectations. Realistically, the answer is it depends. If it's a couple people, we can probably make some moves around and have it happen within a week or so. If it's a lot of people, we're going to have to hire externally. That's going to take a couple weeks. And that's something that, kind of going back across the last couple topics, I think the leadership really needs to have a good relationship on both sides. Yeah, you may not want to scale up until beta like a big team. You should still have the core people there who know your philosophies, your morals, like all that stuff. So that, because the idea is, right, when you're not there, they should be able to speak to and act on your priorities. And so, like, for example, we tell our people, the more heads up you give us, the better. We understand the industry. Trust me, of all the people, we understand the industry. No numbers are promised and set in stone. But we can kind of move ahead. People don't think about, like, hardware. COVID was really hard because we kept ramping up. We bought out all of the freaking hardware along the West Coast. Like, people literally, like, major companies were coming to us to do testing because we had their hardware and they couldn't get it themselves. So these are the things you really just need to establish, like having a good relationship and, having very clear and honest expectations. There's a desire for us to want to make miracles happen. Mm-hmm. And then that becomes the new normal. And then we have to make more miracles happen, and so that can kind of spin. But to kind of, before I go too far out of topic, that's what I would say, is making sure you're being open and honest and letting us know all of your needs. so that we can handle all the moving pieces.
So how would it work if I said I need 10 testers for 3 months in like 2 weeks from now, or something like that? What I'm getting at is like, what happens to those testers when that time period is done?
So realistically, what we're probably going to do is we're going to move 3 or 4 from other projects and backfill there, and then hire the rest. And so it's going to be, if you need them in 2 weeks, you're probably going to have half the team in a week and the other half over a couple weeks. And honestly, at the end of those 3 months, half those people are probably going to get let go. And the half of them will maybe go to other places, and maybe we'll let those people go to make room for them. But the end of the day is it's a business. And if there is not billable hours for that person to work, then they're laid off.
Okay, so there's something that we don't really talk too often when it comes to outsourced QA, and I feel like we should. So imagine that we have 1,000 testers. That's probably like 200 projects. You come to us, of course, we talk with you, but at least that's something what I'm trying to do when I talk with publishers or developers who come to us. I try to be honest. They tell us, so you come to me and tell me like, hey, you need 10 people. So first of all, I'm going to tell you what QA says very, very often. And the reply starts with, it depends. So it depends on what kind of people you're looking for. If you're looking for anyone who's junior, maybe we can find someone really, really fast. It also depends on our current situation with other projects. Maybe there's a situation where in 3 weeks' time, we can we can assign 5 testers to the project, and then we recommend you to just wait a bit when we have some more availability of those testers. So that's that. And when there are no projects, I think pretty much every outsourced QA tries to keep those testers as much as possible. So maybe you have this big schedule with 200 projects, try to move pieces around, maybe ask a team like, hey, ask another team, ask another publisher, developer, hey, is there a way to move some pieces around because we want to do something else? But of course, I'm not going to tell you like, hey, we have this project from whoever, from like quadruple A publisher, so we have to ramp down your project to accept the other one. We try to make everyone happy.
Yeah.
And it's not always easy.
Yeah, I can imagine that.
And that's, I think, one of the advantages of, like, especially on the publisher side of the managed service model. Because we're working with all of those projects and everybody is in on the same thing, like we have the same goal, right? We don't want to lose like experience and intelligent people that we've invested in. So when you say, hey, I need 10 people, I can talk to you or your manager or whatever and say, hey, here's realistically what we're like. Oftentimes what we'll do is like, we have another project that's going to ramp down the next month. Can I give you half now and half then? And the idea is we kind of share the balance of the risk of like, it's worth it for you to maybe flatten that curve so that you can maintain the people that have been working with your stuff for a long time. It's harder to go across like clients because of NDAs and stuff, but within clients, it's a lot easier to kind of move those people. And that's how we gather that, that tribal knowledge across 10 years.
Yeah, I found that a lot of that communication, we start with, I need 10 testers for 3 months starting on July 1st, blah, blah, blah. And then when you dig into it more, you realize from the dev side, actually, I don't need 10. I just made up that number. I need to be able to test a game of this size with this many test cases. Like when you drill down a little bit further and realize, here's the need I'm trying to service, you can bring that to your external QA. And I've had a lot of traction with that, saying, all right, here's my timelines. Here's what's shifting. Here's the milestones. Here's what I think I need. What do you think I need? And a lot of the times they come up with some of the solutions Tommy mentions, like, well, how about let's get 2 people a couple weeks or a month before your timeline, ramp them up, get them on documentation, have them just sort out the game so they can help the rest of the teams ramp up quicker. So they come back with a different pitch on how we can solve the problem. But that only happens if you're open to communicate that and actually dig a little deeper and say, hey, here's what I'm trying to service. So a lot of my communication with external is I try to be as early and transparent as possible. Like anytime a timeline shifts or an expectation moves around, I just not even an email, just send them a quick DM. It's like, hey, I got this going on. If you want to chat about it, let me know. Give them as much of a runway as possible to know, hey, I now know I'm going to ramp up this at this roughly this time. Let's chat through it. And from my perspective, like a week often doesn't matter from a large game perspective's timeline. So just trying to be less rigid on the dev side actually gets you more from your relationship with external as well.
Yeah, and I think what you did a really good job of pointing out there is the idea of I need 10 testers is you're speaking the solution, not the problem. And if you are going to like actually capitalize on the expertise that outsourcing companies and XDev companies have, then you're going to have to talk to them about the problem itself too, and see what solutions they come up with, because they might suggest something very different. They might say, look, if you brought 2 testers on 3 months earlier, then you might not even have the same level of testing needs by the time you get to this critical point that you're talking about, at which point maybe you only need 5, right? And that is just much more manageable for us than it is for you. So I think that you're right, that being flexible is both beneficial to you because it helps improve your planning, but also being flexible and transparent helps the XDev companies, because doing 2 testers for a long period of time and 5 testers for a short period of time is a lot easier than ramping 10 up and then 10 down, and then maybe they don't even get to keep their jobs because there's no other project for them to move to. So yeah, really good points all around.
I think agency is a really important part that you bring up, of like telling us what the solution you want is, like the end goal, and then we can work together. Like one anecdote I tell a lot, especially when it comes to this topic, is we had a client who just wanted bodies. You know, we kept saying like, hey, we can help, we can provide you feedback on the test cases. These reports are kind of lackluster. We can, add some value. And they were like, no, you just run test cases and write bugs. And this happened for like 9 months to a year. So it's okay. That's what you're getting, right? We're not going to send our our high quality engineers over there or anything, because they're not going to be used. Sure enough, politics happened, and there was a reverse, and suddenly this team needed all this like skill, because they had to start owning a bunch of things, and it was like, well, it's going to take you a while. Like, I'm sorry, but we told you so. So the more you kind of trust us in the beginning, which comes with a lot of communication and feedback, the better it'll be down the road.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of like internal QA can have like a lot of hangups around like sharing too much information, because maybe there will be a leak or something like that. And I think that can create a habit of being protective of information all the time, instead of in a more context specific way, right? Like maybe, you don't need to share everything about everything with all of the XDev testers that are working on the project, but at the very least, you can and should be as transparent as possible with like the project leads and the project management team in the XDev company, so that they can help you figure out what kind of strategy to execute. And that is a very different level of sharing, and a very different kind of sharing than exposing all of like your intimate secrets about your company and your game to like everyone on the team. Jakub, go ahead.
Yeah, so Tommy, you mentioned that sometimes people come to you and they're like, hey, we want 5 or 10 testers. I'm actually not against doing it, because it may make things easier. Because on the other hand, sometimes companies reach out to us, they give us like 2 sentences about the game and ask us to estimate how much QA will cost. And then we have to go deeper. It's actually a good thing, because we can teach them or show them what QA they have to look into. But in general, estimating needs for QA or anything in game dev is this a quote. This is something that I read a couple of weeks ago. It's not rocket science, it's art. Just because games are art, so you can't really say like, I need 5 testers for a month, and then your game will be in perfect condition. Why? because let's say devs are not fixing bugs fast. Maybe the game will change at some point, or maybe there will be a new console that you will want to release the game on, and those 5 testers won't be enough.
Maybe the game would change at some point. That never happens, Jacob. Never in my career have I seen the design of a game change partway through development. Are you kidding? No, that happens all the time. But yeah, it's a good call out. Like, it's a much more fluid, like, process than we would like it to be, right? I know I've come up with tons of test plans for a project that say we're going to do this at this milestone and this at this milestone, and these are all of our dates. And you can act like those are set in stone, but a lot of times they're not. And so, good planning, I think, accounts for the possibility of change and has a plan for how to tackle it. And when you get a little bit too specific, you will find out that you're less and less likely to actually it's less and less likely to actually look like what you think it will. It's kind of like how predicting the weather in the future, like the further out into the future you go, the harder it is to predict the weather of a specific day, right? You might be able to predict general weather trends, right? In 2 years, it's going to be hotter in this particular summer by an average of a degree or two or whatever, right? But saying that in 2 years, on August 31st, it is going to be 98 degrees in San Jose, California, that is virtually impossible. So when you are planning for a game's development, you have to think in terms of what are the weather trends going to be like in the future, as opposed to what is the temperature going to be on August 31st.
I also think that COVID challenged a lot of the assumptions we've been making in the industry for years. People went home and there wasn't a huge amount of crazy leaks. And so I think that helped people realize the one thing I can tell you, if you're worried about a leak, you get what you pay for. So models like VMC back in the day, where everyone just knew if you went there, it was probably going to leak, because they had people were showing up that morning to find out if they have a job. If I don't have a job tomorrow to lose, what is keeping me from leaking? But when they're part of the team, they don't want it leaked either. They're in on it. And I think that's kind of a good thing to bring up too, is make sure for successful, just having that relationship where you're talking every day, even if you don't have something planned, those what we call water cool conversations that happen when you're on site together and you walk by and talk to each other and make a decision. People always forget that we weren't there for that, right? So oftentimes important things happen and shift our priorities without us knowing. So making sure you're just kind of always talking, always having that relationship, so that way things can organically happen.
So on that note, I actually want to do a quick lightning round. So I would love to hear from each of you in about 30 seconds to a minute. Quick thoughts. What do you think about the morale of XDev teams? How do you support XDev teams maintaining their morale? Start with Jacob.
Okay, so I know it may sound weird, but people who test a game like playing the game when it's out. So it's great if you can provide us with game codes or even physical copies. Also, please keep in mind that testers love being in credits because it's also in their portfolio. And something I will say something unusual, I think, but be loose during calls. I had one case when I was a lead. I was in a very good relationship with one of our partners to a point where we were joking during calls, and I love that jokes. And the thing is that at some point, this person had to disconnect from the call because it was too much. Of course, it was really a cool talk, but just be cool with your outsource.
Tommy.
Yeah, I think he brought up a couple of points. Most people don't realize we don't get a copy of the game by default. There are loopholes we can kind of use. We don't always get our names in the credits. or swag. And the reality is there are legal walls there that we have to follow. And it's easy to kind of forget about those and just forget that we're human beings too. And we want to be part of the team. The more we have ownership and agency, the more passion and dedication we're going to have. So really just like having those face-to-face conversations, like Jakub mentioned, goes a long way. Also, like, it is a business. And so at the end of the day, the dollar matters. And I don't think the clients understand the leverage they have to improve those lives. Because a lot of companies, for an outsourcing company, that is our 100% our model. And so every penny counts. We don't have a marketing budget and this budget. It's all just billable hours, right? So like keeping that in mind can be difficult, I guess, without rambling too much. We get 15 days off. We didn't have that until our client was demanded it. And then now it's default. And so stuff like that, I think people don't understand the leverage they have.
Yeah. David?
One for me, retrospectives, just like out of Scrum. I do retrospectives with my external QA. They all get on a call. We talk about what's working, what's not working, talk through options, ask them how we think we should solve those problems. So I ask them to both bring up the problems and what their pitch solutions to those problems are. And it's both a morale boost, but it's also a huge efficiency and effectiveness improvement to my team and processes. Again, going into that group calls, getting some FaceTime with folks, having a private channel. I love having a private channel that's just for my internal and external QA to talk to each other, and nobody else is in there. And that allows them to kind of be a little more casual with each other and get to know each other better. And then just devoted check-ins of checking in with them and having a suggestion or feedback system. Some way that they can say, okay, it's not a bug, but the game would be better if, and just having some method that they can engage with to provide those suggestions to the rest of the team. Because I find often if you don't proactively do these things, it won't happen. A lot of it feels like it needs to come from the internal side because externals trying to be professional and trying not to trouble the waters too much. So doing those things proactively and saying, hey, here's a way you can provide feedback is super valuable to both morale and to the game.
Yeah, we will definitely follow your lead when it comes to that kind of stuff. Also creating a culture where feedback is cherished and not like looked down upon, where like failures are okay. And, if we're not making mistakes, we're not trying hard enough, right? So finding that balance so that there's more of a supportive culture kind of a.
And I will say that my tip is learn their names. Treat them like named characters, not nameless extras. Because it actually makes a difference to like how you interact with people if you treat them like people who actually have names instead of being, outsource tester 1, outsource tester 2, and outsource tester 3. There are ways that I think that XDev companies can help with that too, because I've run into situations where we've had a limited number of accounts, and sometimes the testers who are on the project kind of fluctuate. So instead of naming those accounts, Jakub, Tommy, and David, we name them Tester 1, Tester 2, and Tester 3, and then it becomes much more vague about like who actually is on the other side of this Jira report. And I've found out like later on down the line that, this named test or this tester number 1 that I thought was a single consistent human being is actually like 3 or 4 different people that are kind of fluctuating in and out of the project. And I just had no idea. And part of why was because I only ever interacted with the project lead. I never interacted with the individual testers at all. So as much as possible, I think getting the people that you are working with into calls with your internal team so they can talk to each other directly, giving them their own accounts, getting them onto your your Teams or Slack or whatever, and then getting that direct interaction as much as possible. Treat them like named human beings. That will help them feel like, this company actually knows who I am. They care about me. They value my work. When I do really good work, they notice it, and they give feedback to my manager saying, hey, that Jakub guy, he really knows what he's doing. you should definitely think about, like rewarding him or something like that, because he's like one of our best that we get from y'all. And making like sure that you're giving that feedback to the managers of those testers and telling them like, this person is really good. Like, we really appreciate all of the really solid feedback that we get from them. We really appreciate all of the bug reports they get. They have really good ideas. Our designers have commented on it. Like, just the more you can humanize and treat them like actual humans, the better. And I think that like everyone benefits from that. Let's talk
treat people
about
like humans. Surprise.
let's talk about training, because I don't actually have a ton of visibility into how XDev companies train their testers, and it's one of the things I'm always the most curious about. Is a part of how I like to try and evaluate a company I'm considering working with or not. Is I want, because like part of the advantage of using an XDev company is that they do the training for me. I don't have to train these testers that I'm hiring, because they already have managers and leads and trainers who are supposed to do that and absorb that like time cost essentially. So when I'm looking at which company am I using, one of the questions I ask is like, what is your training process like? What kind of ongoing training do you give to your team? Excuse me. So I'm curious to hear from y'all, like, what have your experiences been like with XDev training? Does that mostly come from the developer, or from the XDev company itself? And then what does that training look like, both up front when you first hire someone and ongoing as they continue to work for that company? Don't all jump in at once.
Okay, I'll go. I just feel like I'm bogarting the mic. It's a mix of both. So the majority of it's going to be by the vendor, right? That's a big part of our draw. And the reality is the bar is getting raised left and right. And so if we want to maintain, our relationships with these people, with these customers and clients, we need to make sure we're continuously improving. And so that means when people come in, you guys, it's a painless kind of transaction for you guys. You guys don't see the training. So we have our basics, right? Oftentimes that starts with like what the job means, how to do it. And then they go to their teams for like on team training, because every team uses a different build deployment, bug database, etc. So we teach them the basics and then they go there. But on top of that, we're constantly kind of collaborating. Again, one of the things about having multiple teams is when one team learns a lesson, we can share that. And so we have, like brown bags. The way we handle it is we have like, basically we'll put out a topic and you can volunteer. Anybody can come to it. And it's just to discuss that thing. If you want to learn about the thing, cool. And so that's an ongoing thing, but we definitely love when you guys teach us as well, because, you guys know what you want best. And what we'll do is we'll take that training. You guys only have to invest 1 hour, and then now it becomes part of our, curriculum, and we can spread that out. Again, making it as minimal on you so it's almost seamless.
So I think that the most important thing I will say for the start is have people who are dedicated to training. Don't treat it as a side job, as a part-time job. Just have someone who will do it, who will dedicate their time to it. And what Tommy mentioned, how to test. We teach, or in general, people in Outsource QA are taught how to test a game, what tools to use, also how to approach specific genres. Because let's say that you've been working on a strategy game for a year or two, and now you're supposed to test a platform game. You may have some experience, you may have played Mario, Sonic, or something else, but you don't really know how to test it. So we can tell what to watch out for, like things like maybe physics, collectibles, and so on. And by doing it, when a tester starts a project, they will know what to look out for at the beginning. Also, how to prepare test cases if needed, how to write bugs, and so on. And what Tommy mentioned is important. I totally agree that if you, as a developer or publisher, has something that you can teach us, just as Tommy mentioned, spend an hour. teach this to us, and then we'll prepare internal training. We won't be having this conversation ever again because it will be within our know-how. And then if someone else comes to us, we'll already know how to do it.
And say I've had a lot of traction with my external QA that, lo and behold, when I set up my project, I wrote a bunch of onboarding documentation for internal QA. So my first step was, here's everything. Here's everything I have of how our various tools are installed, how we use them, my expectations around bugs, how we use our bug database. Because even if they've used the same software, everybody has a different use case for how to use that software. So my organization there is I provided them with everything. I'm like, here's the highest version of my expectations. What do you want to do with this? And what we ended up doing is I was able to identify what I wanted my new testers to know. And it was a bit of cherry picking. So some of the docs, it's like, hey, you already have an internal doc? Great. I will just use that as my training documentation. For other things, they found, well, actually, we have some documentation internal, so I will make sure they know this thing to how you have it documented, but I have my own documentation that will be easier for them. So we were able to get ahead of that by just saying, hey, here's everything I did for external. How do you want to do this for external?
So I've realized that we can actually merge this topic with the how to approach resourcing. So imagine that you are a big publisher. You have 5-10 projects. One of your projects is finishing and another one is about to start. It's a good thing to actually try to combine those timelines, that once one project finishes or ramps down, the other project starts or ramps up, because we can use the same team, or at least a part of the team, because they will already know how to work with you, what tools you use. So you will just have the team you know and the team you like working with.
Yeah, flattening the curve is such an important thing. And again, it's a business, right? So it's not always possible. But it's one of those things where when you have a good relationship between, outsource and client, that it's usually, you can do some pretty cool things. I guess back to answer your specific question, what it looks like, basically it's nurturing passion. There are people out there, who are into all sorts of different things. And a good team isn't a bunch of cookie cutters. It's different people with different strengths. So as Jacob said, there are people who really care about training. Let them train and don't just put it on, a rotating thing where somebody gets asked to do it. There are people who really love, getting into the weeds when it comes to audio. Let them put together something and let them shine, which is great for them. It's also great for us because it's creating more passion elsewhere and also just education in general.
So I'm now we've kind of talked a little bit about training. I'm curious to know, how do y'all evaluate your testers, to make sure that they are meeting expectations and delivering what you expect them to deliver, let alone what the client expects?
So the first thing that comes to mind is, of course, KPIs, because many companies like KPIs, those are numbers that you can put in Excel. But if you want to use KPIs, make sure that there's a context. So I'm going to use an example where I'm preparing monthly reports about our team's performance. So we have all the names, how many bugs they have reported. You also have the number of test cases they have performed. And then you look at it and say hey, this John Doe reported 10 bugs this month, while the previous month it was 100 bugs. What's wrong? So there can be so many things that can go wrong. That can happen, right? The game is about to be released, so you won't have bugs in the game. They are focused on test cases, or maybe this month they worked only for 2 days. So people may want to evaluate them based on KPIs, but in general, I would say how they do their job. So how they write bugs, how they prepare test cases, how good they are at finding bugs. And in some cases, they actually don't find bugs. You have a great tester who's playing through God of War in 2 or 3 hours, and their goal is just to make sure that the golden path works, right? So you evaluate them for what they are doing. Of course, there has to be a general framework at how you look at testers. Also, some HR stuff and so on. But in general, how they do their work, how they do their job.
Yeah.
Yeah, KPIs are a double-edged sword. It's a business, right? We need to be able to track these kind of things. What's important to me on my teams is that, my leaders know these numbers and more importantly can speak to them. So instead of saying there's a magical number quota, what is the team averaging, right? What do the outliers look like? And being able to speak to those. Sometimes, someone doesn't write a lot of bugs, but the bugs they write are really good. Someone might be writing a ton of bugs and they're all Z fighting, right? So that's where the leadership and the managed service part comes in. And we know our people, we know their strengths, what they're doing. Where you guys can help out is making sure you're focusing on the KPIs that reflect what you care about. If you don't care about bug numbers, what do you care about? One of the eternal struggles we have is, like, contractually, bug numbers are part of our agreement, right? And so while it drives our, the leads crazy on the developer and publisher side, and they're like, don't worry about it. Well, I'm sorry, we didn't write a contract with you. We wrote a contract with your boss who does care. And so being able to kind of manage that and being able to speak to that, that's very important. Because I've yet to meet a client who cared more about the numbers than the story behind it. And more often than not, they themselves will tell you, like, don't worry about it. So we have to kind of manage that. Like, hey, yes, we do have you make sure you're not the last guy in line, but don't lose sleep if you're 4th or 5th or 10th or whatever.
Yeah. I think that, like, there are definitely cases where, a tester might have very few bugs written in a month, but it's simply because the thing that you told them to do is a thing that does not produce a ton of bugs. If you say, hey, you're the smoke test guy, every morning you run the smoke test, and that is your job, and the smoke test just happens to be the thing that, the client wants us to do that every day, but also it never produces bugs. It almost never produces bugs. And when it does, it tends to produce high priority ones, but the person doing that is just kind of out of luck if they're, trying to go for the, like, highest bug count of the month or whatever. But I agree with what you were saying about looking at the outliers. Like, whenever you are looking at data, a part of it is not just, like, treating the data as some kind of absolute truth, but rather as an invitation to ask questions. And so if you saw someone who was maybe 100 bugs a month over everyone else on the team, that might actually indicate that something had gone wrong with them. They might be doing what you were talking about with the Z fighting, where they're just constantly, like, writing up all of these like super low priority Z fighting bugs that just get closed as, like, postponed, won't fix, whatever. And so there's another data point that you might look at, which is, like, what percentage of the bugs that they're writing are actually getting fixed? What percentage of the bugs are they writing are actually high priority or showstopper bugs versus low priority bugs? There's a lot of ways to look at KPIs, and having the appropriate context for whatever numbers you're looking at definitely helps.
I think the smoke test is a good example. In that situation, what one could do is essentially track, like, how many times the team had to roll back builds because of a bug that got through, like finding ways to actually quantify their impact. Because if it's not bugs, then what's the value, right? That's the other question. So working to be creative. When people hear KPIs, they immediately go to bugs. And, like, yes, quality is very important, priority, but trying to kind of get out of that box of, like, what I really care about, when we run a smoke test, it's to make sure that we're, everyone's using their time wisely. So, okay, no rolled back builds, something like that.
Or maybe they're just really efficient at running the smoke test. Maybe it takes this tester half the time to run the same smoke test that it takes another tester, because they figured out some shortcuts, some ways that they can run multiple test cases at once or something like that. And then now they're doing this thing that we have to do, but they're not doing it. They're not taking up as much time in order to do it, and it's still getting done, right? So yeah, I think if you are judging people by KPIs, having a, like, diverse portfolio of KPIs to look at definitely helps provide additional context to what they're producing. Jacob, did you have something else to add?
Yeah, so one thing I want to add is, I mean, there will be a section where we'll be giving some suggestions to developers when reaching out to QA, but to external QA. But I wanted to mention here that regarding KPIs, when you as a developer or publisher wants to set up KPIs, what Tommy mentioned for the external QA, ask them if those make sense. I've seen some cases where, let's say, they were saying like there can be no more than 15% of bugs that are marked as trashed or PM confirmation won't fix, right? So this is something that's actually pretty much out of our control. What if you just decide to trash our bugs because you are not happy about them? It doesn't mean that those are not valid. Or you want to have, like, on a daily basis 2 A-class bugs. And if you are talking about priority, it is you as a developer who sets a priority. So you can control it, you can manipulate it. So if you want to put something like this in the contract, please talk with the outsource whether or not this actually makes sense, because they may have a different point of view on it.
Yeah. All right, so we're getting towards the end here, and so I want to ask a little bit of an ironic question at this point in the conversation, which is, how do you get started with outsourcing companies? Like, so if I'm a client and I'm considering using an XDev company and I'm about to go out and hire one, like, what are some of the things that I should be thinking about as I try to figure out what company to hire? And what questions should I be asking those companies before I write a contract with them?
Okay, so maybe I'll start this time. So the first thing I would say is reach out to many different companies, because even if you're happy after talking one of the companies, it doesn't mean that another company can be better, right? So ask them how they operate, what are their suggestions, and why in their opinion, I mean, what they understand as outsourced QA, and how can they really help you? What are their strengths? What are their weaknesses? Because if someone says they don't have any weaknesses, this means that they may not be honest, and there will be not enough transparency in your cooperation, in your partnership, actually.
My number one thing would be just show up, like have open, honest conversations with what you're looking for. As Jacob mentioned before, sometimes they're like, we want outsourcing. Thank you. And being able to know, like, what do you want from it? Do you want us to be able to do X, Y, Z? Are you looking for advice from us or recommendations? Like, knowing what you want goes a long way. And then just having those frank conversations. Like, maybe even like fly out and see their setup. Does it seem like, oh, this is something that makes sense with, what could achieve what I want? Or maybe are they, selling some lies, maybe not lies, but some exaggerations, right? So making sure you just have an open, honest conversation and you're there in the early goes a long way. As Jacob mentioned, just because somebody's doing great, there's a lot of competition right now, raising the bar, and it's great for all of us because it's raising the bar in the industry. But yeah, see what is actually out there and what your options are.
I bet I can guess what the number one first question that a lot of companies ask is, what are your rates?
Mm-hmm.
I'd be surprised if someone asked a question that wasn't that upfront.
Well, that kind of goes to Jacob's question, though, is like, yeah. I can tell you what we charge per person per hour.
Yeah.
But what are you trying to accomplish? And how many hours is that going to take us? How many people do we have to do that? That's the kind of stuff we need to figure out. Are we eye to eye on resources versus requirements?
Yeah. I like what you had said earlier, Jacob, about talking to more than one company. I would even go further and say that if you have the budget and the size to do this, I would say hire more than one company, because there are going to be things that some companies can do really well and other companies can't do those things at all. And sometimes you're going to find that, it's helpful to have two companies that you're working with, because then you can kind of compare the experiences a little bit. When COVID hit and I was working with a couple of outsourcing companies, one of them was like more expensive, but they were very capable, very well trained folks who seemed really on top of the way they approached testing just across the board. But they were more expensive, and so there was reluctance to utilize them more than we were for a handful of very specific things. And then I had this other company that was much cheaper, and we could just get giant piles of bodies essentially. And we found that when COVID hit, the cheaper company had a drastic drop in their capability, in their productivity. Like, it was shocking how different it was post COVID. And the other company, completely flat. They were just as good during COVID as they were prior to COVID. We had just as much confidence in like the steps they were taking in terms of security and things like that. And it was really eye-opening. And if I had only been using one of those companies, I might not have had an appreciation for how good I had it with the company that did not lose productivity, or I might not have realized that the company that was less productive was an anomaly, that wasn't normal, and that I could have higher expectations of them. And things happen all the time to game like outsourcing companies where maybe they have a reduction in force or something like that, or maybe they have some kind of like tech outage and they can't do testing, and so having more than one company that you're working with can help you kind of diversify your reliance on XDev testers, so that if one of them has something bad happen, you still have the other company there to support you, and then maybe you can even flex into utilizing them more until the crisis has like passed. So yeah, I definitely think not only should you talk to more than one company, you should hire more than one company. It is such a benefit from two clients specifically. Yeah, Jacob, go ahead.
There's also one thing I want to mention, because I've just realized. I mean, game dev is all about networking. So you probably know some people in the industry who have worked with outsourced QA. So just asked about their opinion and maybe some recommendations.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, 100%. I don't know anyone who has worked with XDev companies as a client that doesn't have strong opinions about which ones they like and don't like, which we're not going to get into on this podcast, but there are definitely people out there with opinions if you know where to look, and can reach out and talk to them about their experiences.
I got one piece to add that I think we haven't touched on yet. Time zone and time of day. I know I personally made this mistake on a project that we just assumed that since they were in a different time zone, they had to work the regular hours of that time zone. And on a future project, somebody asked like, well, yeah, do we want to go with them because they don't work the same time as us? And it was very valuable to us to have them working with an overlapping time. And they reached out, like, oh, yeah, we have another shift that works that time. They're like tiny bit more expensive, so we didn't offer them. But that's it? That's the cost? Oh, please, let's work with them. So my lesson learned there is don't assume that because they live in a different time zone that they work specific hours. Be upfront if that is of value to you, to have either to have them working the same time as you because you want that communication overlap, or if you value them being offset from you so that they're working independent of you. Just make that clear up front and ask them what the options are, and don't assume that they are bound by where they are physically located.
So whenever the word assume pops out, whenever I hear this word, there's the sentence that I learned: don't make an ass of you and me, just don't assume.
Yeah. The thing that you were saying there, Dave, reminds me of like how much flexibility there is in working with outsourcing if you just talk to them. I had a similar experience where I was working with an out-of-time zone group, and we were like, gosh, it would be really nice if we had at least just one of you available to like answer questions about some of the bugs that we're seeing when we're like going through it in the morning. And so they're like, well, we could like shift like a couple of people to be like 4 hours later, so that way they have some overlap with you. Like they can do an evening shift. It won't cost that much money, and then they can also support you like with on-demand testing in the morning in case you need that kind of support. And it was pretty low cost because we weren't hiring a whole team to work that like shift. We just needed a couple of people to work 4 hours, and that was like ultimately really reasonable. And so, but I never would have like known that was an option if I hadn't asked them about it. And that's been true of a whole bunch of things where if I hadn't asked, they never would have told me, and we never would have like been aware that there was this really nice solution that would solve a bunch of our problems that we were having. So yeah, just like I think that XDev companies are a lot more flexible than people may realize, but that might also vary based on the company. Maybe like the specific company you're working with isn't flexible, and maybe there's another company out there that is more flexible and is more willing to be accommodating with things like that. So, one more reason to kind of shop around and see what your options are, and also be super proactive about communicating with XDev companies.
Yeah, well, that's another good reason for, testing out multiple or having multiples, because priorities change. So I can't tell you how many times like we want them on the same time, but then we get towards launch and it's like we want them at night because that's when the builds are coming in and that's when the bugs are getting fixed. So being able to have that's what I'm kind of my prediction for I guess where I'm seeing the industry going is they're looking more kind of for around the clock support than one specific one, and I think it's going to be multiple different solutions to get that accomplished.
On that note, let's actually talk about the future. What about you, Jakub and David? Like, where do you see kind of the future of outsourcing? Like, where is it going next? Is it going to continue to skyrocket in usage? Are we going to see a shift backwards to focusing more on internal QA, or is it going to change in some way? Like, where is outsourcing QA going right now?
So I think that there'll be more outsourced QA than ever in the upcoming years, just because of the budget limitations. Maybe you don't want to have, let's say, 10 testers in your dev team because you just need them for a month, so you won't hire them for a permanent contract. So you will use outsource for a specific task. And then if your game gets canceled for whatever reason, you just don't have a problem, right? But on the other hand, I feel like outsource will be more important, not only in terms of numbers, but in terms of the cooperation. So you will use them as an extension of your arm rather than just asking them for help temporarily.
I think the biggest thing I'm seeing is that mostly due to COVID, we have all learned that folks can work very effectively remotely. Is you can dial them into a call. People can all do things without being physically located in the office. So that difference between internal and external QA used to be you're physically located in the office and you're not physically located in the office. And that barrier is eroding over the last few years. So I fully expect to see a lot more of a push on outsourcing. And I expect to see a push on the internal dev QA of saying, what do you offer that external doesn't? And hopefully driving up that knowledge base, that capacity, and trying to show other ways to be effective. And I suspect, and this is my call for, track me in 5 years, that this means that you won't be just hiring internal QA with no experience. Like the historical, anybody can play test the game. You just bring them in, have them play the game, write bugs. That will not be an internal position anymore. The cost doesn't make sense when you can externalize that. So I suspect it's going to put some pressure on internal QA to step up their game. And I expect to see even more external QA, outsourcing QA, get involved in that process, because there's no reason you can't just dial them into the same call and have them working as part of your team.
I think we're in an interesting era. Reminder, these are my personal opinions. I'm not speaking for any company I may or may not work for. I think the introduction of unions is going to be very interesting to see. Um, it's going to ask a lot of uncomfortable questions, and how those questions are answered are going to, I think, change a lot of things. In my perspective, I see, to a certain degree, studios are going to have to figure out like what they're going to readdress what we should be doing in house. Like, if we don't want QA to be temporary, why do we only have temporary workers, right? So as QA becomes more and more part of the thing, shift left, which we're all seeing, I think there's going to be more. Epic and Nintendo do the same thing, right? More first party or more full time. But as I said, that bar's going higher and higher on the outsource world. The competition's so much better. If you can get someone who can code at minimum wage, that's always going to be on the top of a lot of people's mind. So I think we're going to see a little bit of both. And I think it's going to be, to be blunt, a painful year of kind of recalibrating.
My prediction is that we're going to continue to see people lean into outsourcing pretty heavily because it is just significantly cheaper than hiring internal QA. And I think we're going to see internal QA positions evolve in the way that David was talking about, where they're going to have to find new ways to contribute to their teams in order to maintain the same value proposition, right? What is the justification for paying a internal QA person a full salary if you can pay a much cheaper hourly wage to an XDev group for bug finding and bug writing, right? There's a lot of things an internal QA can do, though, and are uniquely positioned to do extremely effectively if they are willing to learn some new skills and figure out how they can improve the value that they're bringing to their company. But it is going to involve, I think, a significant shift in how they approach their work and what their priorities and focuses are. I also think that there's going to be a point where companies start to realize the limitations of using outsourcing groups. I think there's some inherent limitations to utilizing groups that you don't have control over the training and hiring practices for those companies because they're doing it on their own. And they're either going to find ways to work with those companies to get closer parity in terms of their expectations and needs with those kinds of practices, or they're going to start to wonder if maybe they actually liked it better when they were doing at least some of that themselves. So I'm curious to see how far do we go down the rabbit hole of let's use outsourcing, and then how far do companies kind of want to scale back a little bit? Be okay, we want to use outsourcing, but maybe not quite as much as we were originally thinking. Maybe there are more things that we want to handle ourselves, or maybe we want to change the way the relationship works so that we're more involved in certain aspects than we currently are, where we just kind of say, you guys just handle all of that for us because we don't want to deal with it. So I don't think that we have reached the new equilibrium yet. I think we're still there's still some push and pull between internal companies and outsourcing in terms of figuring out who does what. And I'm very curious to see where we land. All right, so final question before we move on to wrap up. Final advice to outsourcing clients about how to approach working with their outsourcing companies. Who wants to go first?
So I'm going to defer to Tommy and Jacob on this.
If I can go first. I think it goes back to just remember that we're humans, right? And that goes a long way in terms of what we what our priorities are, what we're passionate about. Like having that connection, that human connection with us is going to make the situation better for both sides, right? We're going to be happier. The more agency we have, the more invested we're going to be in your product kind of thing. The more we feel bought in, the more investment kind of thing. And just having those conversations on a regular basis, I want to challenge all of you. Like, as Jacob said, do you know the names of at least like certain level of all the people you're working with? If not, go learn them. Go find out what their favorite ice cream is or whatever. Like, just remember that we're humans, right? And while yes, it is cheaper to maybe go outsource or to go out overseas or whatever, we're all gamers and we're all passionate about the same thing, and we all just want to work together to make an amazing game.
Okay, so I've made a note. I may have a few points. So on top of be human, make sure you understand that. It's also business for us. But if, let's say, we talk about a project that's supposed to start in a month, and you tell us, okay, book the team, and then for the next 4, 5, 6 weeks you're on radio silence, we don't really know what to do. If you, after the deadline, you come back to us and say like, okay, you start tomorrow, we can't really do it because we have our obligations. Other than that, when talking with outsource, learn their experience, because they may be good in area A, but you are in area B. You're developing a different game, and they may not have experience that would be suitable for you. Don't assume, as mentioned earlier, and talk about expectations and make your expectations clear. If you have like a budget for $1 million for the whole QA, tell them that you have it, because this way they can. Someone who may not understand QA but works with in QA, they will prepare a budget for $1 million without any buffer. So watch out for those red flags there.
Just give me a sort of segment. No, I think you guys covered really good things. The only one I want to drive home, I think I've said it 3 or 4 times, is just talk to your external QA. I love every week I have a 30-minute sync with my 2 QA leads, and sometimes we talk about nothing important at all. Absolutely not. We talk about what games we're playing, we're just shooting the breeze, and then at the very end they're like, oh yeah, by the way, we had this major issue that will be solved if you just talk about it. I'm like, oh, all 30 minutes, totally worth it. Totally the best meeting of my week. So just break down those barriers and just talk to your external QA. Get to know them outside of work if you can pull that off. And I've had so many problems just melt because I was talking to the right person and asking them the right questions, and they felt comfortable talking to me about those problems.
Yeah, smoking's bad for your health, but I can't tell you how many problems have been solved just standing around the smoking area, right? Like just having a casual conversation where the guard's down, right, and people are just spitballing, and someone overhears it and goes, hey, have you thought about, that just goes so far, and I think it's easily forgotten in the outsourcing world.
Also, don't smoke. If you can
Yeah,
quit smoking,
bad for your health.
definitely do that. The Surgeon General advises that you quit smoking immediately.
Disclaimer, we still advise smoke testing all of your builds. That is very valuable. Please do not misinterpret us.
Yeah, and I'll say that, and I think this kind of touches on what y'all are saying. Remember that not every outsourcing tester is the same as the next tester. Not every outsourcing company is the same as the next outsourcing company. Not every studio within an outsourcing company is the same as another studio within that same outsourcing company. I've had great results with one studio at like one part of an outsourcing company, and then I work with them again in a different context with a different studio, and my experience is totally different. So if you have a bad experience with one company, don't expect that to be the case for all of them. If one company tells you that they can't do something, maybe someone else can. And if you find that like you're having certain kinds of problems with specific companies, then maybe when you're shopping around for your second team, that could be something you look to patch up by asking them if they can specifically cover the things that other company can't. So remember that there's more than one company out there, more than one studio within companies, more than one person within a studio. So there's a ton of diverse potential interactions that you have with your outsourcing, and remember that they might not be as uniform as you would think they are. So I want to talk about the next episode that we are planning to do in September. We want to revisit the topic of outsourcing, but this time, today was very focused on the client and the client's perspective and advice for the clients. Our next episode, however, is going to be very much focused on the experience of the people at the outsourcing team, and it's going to be more at outsourcing companies, and it's going to be more geared towards providing them advice on how to work with like developers and how to be effective testers working on a project with a separate development team. So before we go, I want to give us a chance to talk to those folks, specifically at outsourcing companies. Is there anyone at an outsourcing company that you would like to give advice to, and what would that advice be? And that can be like a project lead, a project manager, or maybe the CEO of an outsourcing company, or an individual tester who is working there. What advice would you give to someone who is working at an outsourcing company? And we'll use that as kind of a preview for what we're going to talk about next time.
Okay, I hope I won't throw myself under a bus, but if you're a tester, I mean, I've seen this happen many, many times. Someone joins a company, hears different stories from different testers, and believes them. Just don't believe those stories that you hear, those urban legends. Just do your job and try to learn from more experienced people, usually your managers, if possible. Just talk to them as you are talking with normal people.
My advice is question your rituals. And by that I mean, as an example, I had my external QA was sending me a end of day daily report that ran down, here's what we did today, here's what we tested, here's our regressions, this was our bug count, this was all this stuff. And it was very clean, very neat, very orderly. Absolutely no one on the internal side read that email every single day. And I'm like, why is this spam here? And I just click, markers read. And at one point, I thankfully asked them, like, hey, who asked you to build this report? Is this like the standard for your company, that this is just something you do? It's like, oh no, this is what we do for you. This is your standard. And we're all going, well then, if you don't want it and I don't want it, why are we doing it? And so we came to a compromise, like, okay, for the higher ups, they want to see an email probably. So let's just cut this expectation. Like, this takes you how many hours every day? Oh, no. Okay, let's slim it down this way. Let's convert it from daily to once a week and just the slimmer version of the report. So my takeaway there is question your rituals. Like, you may have been told to do this at one point by somebody on the internal side. That doesn't mean that it's actually providing value. It doesn't mean they even want it. So if you find yourself consistently doing something that eats up hours every week, just check in every once in a while and say, hey, is this still the best way for us to do this? Is this still valuable to you? Is there a different way you want us to change it? And even if you come up with those soft questions, they might come back with saying, oh, you're still doing that thing? Yeah, I already set up a spam filter for that. So question your rituals. Make sure it's actually continuing to provide value in the future, even if you were asked to do it a year ago.
I'm feeling attacked right now, David, because I'm remembering all of the reports I've written throughout my career that were maybe read by 10% of the people I sent them
to. I've snuck in little things like, if you're reading this message, contact David and he will give you a cookie. Nobody came for a cookie.
I put a free code at the bottom of one.
The best part is when someone reaches out to you like, hey, what's the state of the game? We've been sending you reports for 10 months now.
I'm actually going to change my answer based off that. It was going to be always provide opportunity for feedback, which you should still do. If you ask people for feedback, they're not going to give you much. But if you give them the opportunity, they're going to talk and it's going to come up. But with your reports, this is what I tell all my people too. What are you trying to answer with that report? What are you trying to achieve? Is it doing that? Cool. If not, like, raise it up. Don't be afraid to bring these things up to, the client. There's, political ways to do it. Be carefully. We don't want to poop all over it. But if you have something to bring to the table, if you think there's a better idea, bring it up. You'd be surprised how many times, like going back to like the time zone thing, they just didn't know, right? So we need to do a better job on our side of, advertising that and providing that. And kind of, I guess what I tell people is, more often than not, it's better to ask for forgiveness than permission when it comes to like this kind of stuff. just kind of go out there. And as long as we're having an open, honest dialogue, it'll be accepted well.
And my feedback is actually going to be for folks who are like pitching their services to clients. Something that I have run into periodically is I will ask a outsourcing company, what is the difference between your junior tester and your senior tester? Like, what is the value, like, proposition? Why am I paying more for this more senior person? And the answer I often get is they have more experience. They have been on the job for 2 or 3 years more or something like that. That's the value. And I don't care about that. I actually do not care about experience in the slightest. What I care about is capabilities and what they actually produce. So when you say they have 2 or 3 more years of experience, what does that mean? Does that mean that they write 50% more bugs? Does that mean that they're able to do more technical testing that the junior testers can't do? Does that mean they can write test cases? Does that mean that they are capable of writing effective reports that the junior testers can't write? What am I getting for this extra money that I'm paying for? I want to know, because 2 or 3 years of experience tells me nothing. But a list of capabilities, a list of things this person can do that the junior tester cannot, that is actually worth paying some more money. So when you're pitching those more senior folks to me and saying you should pay more money for these people, I want to know why, and I don't want the answer to be experience. Cool. I think that is where we're going to stop. So let's go ahead and move on to wrapping up. So overall, we talked about outsourcing today, and specifically we talked about where the game industry is at with outsourcing right now. We talked about the expectations that clients have of what they're going to get from outsourcing. We did a bit of a comparison in terms of what internal QA versus external QA can do. We talked a lot about communication. That was a big part. How much do you include your testers? How much do you try to make them a part of your process? How much do you try and make them a part of the team? We talked about training, and we talked about getting started with outsourcing. Talked about all the things. And next time we meet, we're going to talk more about the outsource tester's perspective. What are the things that they need to know in order to be more effective at their role? So with that, let's move on to today's Bug of the Cast. And Jacob had a really good one that he's going to share with us.
Okay, but this is something I will improve on compared to what we talked about 2 hours ago. Because what is a bug? What is a bug without media, right? So I don't have a video, but I found like those 2 characters. Lydia Sobieska, nice. The Polish premier. So I'm a big fan of fighting games, and in Soul Calibur 3, so those are like Tekken characters, but in Soul Calibur 3, you had this bug that whenever you were doing an animation, in some cases, let's say that Lydia is throwing Panda this way, you as a Lydia could cancel your animation. So normally it would look like this. And if you perform this bug, you could do it like start, then let Panda fly like this, and then kick its butt. It was called variable cancel. It was useful not only, it could be used not only in throws, but also in some moves. And it made the competitive scene quite dead quite fast, because the game was released, I think, in September or October 2005. It was on PlayStation 2, so it wasn't patched. And this bug was found like a couple of weeks after the release. The game was released on the arcades like a year after the console version, which was very, very weird. It was fixed, but by that time, not many people were interested in that game.
Wow, it's so interesting to think about how like a bug can cause the perception of a game to just be dead on arrival, like that. Because especially in fighting games, if you're not like, if the competitive like community is not interested in your fighting game, then it is just not going to take off the way that you would like it to. And so exploits like that are particularly important there. Whereas there may be less important in like single player RPGs, because the only experience that you're ruining there for the bug is your own, but not necessarily the people you're competing with. Anyway, thank you for sharing, Jacob. That was awesome. That's it for us today, folks. I want to thank David, Tommy, and Jacob for joining me on the podcast today. We'd also like to thank our audience for listening. We wouldn't be doing this podcast without you. If you have any suggestions for future topics or bugs of the day, we'd love to hear about them. If you're a QA professional and you would like to be on the podcast, we'd love to have you. In either case, please contact us at undergroundgameqa@gmail.com. You can also reach out to us on X, formerly Twitter, at Underground QA, or more preferably on LinkedIn at the Underground Game QA LinkedIn page. We'd love to hear from you and collaborate. We also have an open Discord server. You can find a link to that on all of our social media pages or search for it in Discord server lists. Before we go, Jacob, David, Tommy, do you have anything that you would like to plug?
You touched on the Discord server. I want to double down on that a little bit. In our Discord server, there's all sorts of resources in there that you can talk about. Get your resume reviewed, talk to professionals, talk to testers. But one of the channels is called The Library, and it has a collection of GDC talks, videos, books, audiobooks, other podcasts that if you were looking for just more things to read up or listen to, go ahead and check out The Library. And we have a couple of work we're doing there to try to round up that resource and make it easier for you to kind of scroll through all that data. So if you're looking for even more things like this podcast, go to the Library channel in our Discord server and scroll through there, see if there's anything that interests you.
Okay, so maybe it's my turn. So two things. If you are at Gamescom this year, come say hi. You can find me easily on LinkedIn. And now, if you are watching this and you are Polish and for some reason you are following fighting games, follow me on Twitter and YouTube because I make content about fighting games. I play them, do commentary, and so on. That's why last week I streamed for 33 hours during the weekend.
Oh, wow. You're a big streamer then. You're streaming a lot.
I mean, I stream a lot, but doesn't mean that I am a big streamer.
No, fair enough. Tommy?
That segues perfectly into what I was going to say. I don't have anything awesome going on right now to pitch, but I'm reminded, being on Twitch right now, that those of you with Amazon Prime, you have free subscriptions. Go use those. Go give it to some burgeoning artist and support them. It's free.
And yeah, I'm also going to double down on the Underground Game QA Discord. A couple of community events that we've been doing in there lately is whenever we do an episode, we are trying to very consistently have a community discussion about the content of that episode before we do it. Usually the week before, we'll meet on like a Saturday morning. Anyone can jump into the server and talk to us, and we will just talk about whatever we're going to be talking about in the next episode with anyone who wants to show up and tell us what they think or what they think that we should cover in that episode. So that'll probably be in either late August or early September for the next one, where we will be talking about outsourcing, specifically advice for the folks who work at outsourcing companies. So come talk to us then. The other thing is every second Saturday, we also have a community discussion hour. We usually just kind of hang out, drink coffee, and talk about the industry. We also sometimes been playing Scriblio, which is like a Pictionary style game. I put together a list of Scriblio words that is entirely based off of like testing words and video game titles. And that's been fun to see people try and draw test case management or localization, as the case may be. Anyway, we like to have fun in that Discord, so you are more than welcome to join us there. Come have fun with us and talk about testing with us. So that's it for us. Thanks again for joining us today, everyone. And as always, please keep testing, keep playing games, and keep washing your hands. Bye, everybody.